Welcome to Coffee Break. Thoughtful conversations for a busy world. Let's begin.
You know, usually when we talk about healing from a physical wound, there is this very comforting, almost mechanical linearity to the whole process.
Right, it's very predictable.
Yeah, exactly. You fall off your bike, you scrape your knee on the pavement, and immediately the cause and the effect are just inextricably linked.
You know exactly why you're bleeding.
Right. You wash it, you apply pressure, you put a bandage on it, and your biological systems just go to work. The person who caused the wound, which in that specific case is you by misjudging a turn, is also the exact same person tending to it.
It's a perfectly closed loop.
It makes logical sense to the brain.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
It is biologically and cognitively neat. The timeline of the injury and the timeline of the recovery are perfectly aligned.
Yeah.
Our brains find that kind of symmetry deeply satisfying because it reinforces our internal model of cause and effect. It basically tells us that the world is safe and predictable.
But then you step into the psychological realm, or the emotional realm, or honestly, just the incredibly messy, unpredictable reality of interacting with other human beings.
Which is where things get complicated.
Very complicated. Suddenly, that neat little closed loop is just completely shattered. You're walking around with a wound. Maybe it's a massive financial wound caused by a business partner who embezzled funds.
Wow.
Or maybe it's a deep emotional wound from a betrayal in a marriage, or a severe professional setback caused by a toxic boss, or even a sudden macroeconomic shift that just wiped out your entire industry.
Things you had absolutely no control over.
Exactly. You are bleeding, metaphorically speaking. You are in real measurable pain, but you didn't fall off the bike. Someone else or something else pushed you.
Which fundamentally alters the entire architecture of how you and how your nervous system process that pain.
Right.
The loop is broken. The origin of the trauma and the locus of the healing no longer reside in the same entity. And that creates a profound psychological crisis.
So we are focusing intensely today on a single, incredibly potent concept drawn from a text titled Radical Accountability and the Burden of Shared Responsibility.
It's such a powerful piece.
It really is. We are going to put the premise of this text under a microscope today because it's the kind of paradigm shift that can completely rewire how you interact with the most difficult parts of your own life.
Absolutely.
The core theme we're unpacking is nestled right in the subtitle of our source text, which is taking responsibility for things that aren't your fault. And the lens we want you to look through for the rest of this deep dive is this. You didn't cause the wound, but you are the only one who can heal it.
And, you know, the stakes here couldn't be higher. Every single person navigating the modern world is carrying a wound or facing a circumstance or trying to dig out of a mess that they did absolutely nothing to cause.
Right, it's just unavoidable.
It's an unavoidable byproduct of existing in an interconnected society.
Yeah.
But the natural instinct, like the biological default setting of the human mind, is to wait for the person who caused the wound to come back and fix it.
We want them to make it right.
We are wired to wait for fairness. But we are going to explore how waiting for that fairness is not a virtue, but a self-destructive trap that keeps you paralyzed.
Yeah.
And how adopting a radical form of ownership is the ultimate and perhaps the only tool for reclaiming your agency.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the semantic divide at the very heart of this framework. The title explicitly calls out the tension between two specific words, fault and responsibility.
Right. Two words we constantly mix up.
We really do. In casual conversation, in corporate boardrooms, even in therapy sessions, we tend to use these words interchangeably. We treat them like they're synonyms.
Which is a huge mistake.
Yeah, structurally, they're operating on completely different timelines, aren't they?
They absolutely are. And the conflation of those two concepts is the root cause of, honestly, an incalculable amount of human suffering and stagnation.
How so?
Well, when you strip them down to their mechanics, they point in completely opposite directions in time. Fault is fundamentally backward-looking.
Backward-looking, okay.
Yeah, when you are asking about fault, you're acting as a historian. You're acting as a forensic investigator. You were asking, who caused this? What was the specific sequence of events, the chain of custody of bad decisions that led to this disaster Who is to blame?
It's an analytical process.
Entirely concerned with auditing the past.
So it's like the detective standing in the middle of a room, looking at a shattered antique vase on the floor, dusting for fingerprints to figure out exactly who knocked it off the pedestal.
That is the realm of fault, exactly.
Right.
But responsibility is fundamentally forward-looking.
Forward-looking, yes.
Responsibility abandons the historical audit entirely and asks, okay, given the indisputable fact that the vase is now broken on the floor, who is going to go to the closet, get the broom, and sweep up the sharp glass so that the next person who walks through this room doesn't slice their foot open?
Right. It's about what happens next.
Responsibility is about present tense reality and future tense action. The friction arises because we subconsciously demand that the person who is at fault must automatically be the person who takes responsibility.
I want to anchor this in a scenario that makes the absurdity of that demand really tangible for the listener.
Let's do it.
Imagine it's late at night. You are reading a book in your living room, completely minding your own business.
Cozy, safe.
Exactly. Suddenly, you hear a frantic knock at your front door. You get up, you open the door, and you look down on your welcome mat. There is a wicker basket, and inside that basket is a crying, freezing newborn baby.
Oh, wow.
Now, applying these definitions, it is unequivocally 100% not your fault that this baby is on your doorstep.
Not at all.
You didn't orchestrate this event. You didn't ask for this to happen. You had zero causal role in this situation.
The fault lies entirely, exclusively with whoever abandoned the child and walked away.
Exactly. But the exact second you open that front door, the exact moment you perceive the reality of that freezing baby, it becomes entirely your responsibility to act.
You have to do something.
You have to bring the basket inside. You have to call Child Protective Services. You have to find a blanket. You cannot just stand on your porch in the freezing rain, screaming into the darkness, "Whose fault is this? I demand to know whose fault this is before I do anything."
I mean, you physically could do that, but...
But while you are conducting your forensic audit of the past and demanding justice, the baby in the present moment is dying of hypothermia.
Right. The immediate unfolding crisis does not care about the historical audit of fault. The ambient temperature of the air doesn't pause to consider who left the baby there.
That's a brutal reality.
It is. But if we dive into the evolutionary psychology behind this, we can actually understand why standing on the porch screaming into the dark feels like the right thing to do.
Wait, really? It feels right biologically?
Yes, we are deeply biologically wired to demand that fault and responsibility remain linked. It goes back to the concept of reciprocal altruism in early human tribes.
The idea that early social cohesion relied on strict scorekeeping.
Exactly. Evolutionary psychologists like Lita Cosmides and John Tooby have done extensive research on what they call the cheater detection module in the human brain.
The cheater detection module, that sounds intense.
It's fascinating. For early hunter-gatherer societies to survive, individuals had to cooperate. They had to share meat, share watch duty, share resources.
Everyone had to pull their weight.
Right. If someone took the benefits of the tribe but didn't pay the costs, like if they caused a mess and didn't clean it up, they were a cheater. And allowing a cheater to get away with it was an existential threat to the entire social fabric.
So it wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous.
Highly dangerous. So we developed an incredibly sensitive, highly emotional internal radar for unfairness. When someone is at fault but evades responsibility, our brain flags it as a literal threat to our survival.
Wow. So when we are toddlers on the playground and we are taught that if you break another kid's toy, you have to replace it, we aren't just learning manners.
No, not at all.
We are being socialized into this ancient evolutionary contract. We crave that symmetrical justice.
We have an innate justice drive that is as primal as our drive for food or shelter. It feels deeply, viscerally wrong when the perpetrator runs away, leaving us holding the basket.
It feels like a violation.
It is a violation to our nervous system. Our system rebels against the idea of sweeping up the glass or bringing the baby inside because, on a subconscious level, it feels like we are validating the behavior of a cheater.
Like we're letting them win.
Exactly. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. The friction between what we desperately want to happen, the perpetrator returning to face consequences, and what absolutely needs to happen, us picking up the broom, often causes a complete system override.
We experience a freeze response.
Yes.
We sit down among the broken glass, crossing our arms, and we say, "I didn't knock it over. It is not my job to clean it up." And we just stay there.
And that freeze response, that stubborn refusal to engage with reality until the scales of justice are balanced by some external force, leads us into the most dangerous psychological territory a person can inhabit.
The victim trap.
It leads us directly into the trap of waiting for fairness.
This brings us to a really provocative element of the text. The assertion that waiting for fairness inherently keeps you a victim. It challenges a lot of our cultural programming, doesn't it?
It challenges almost all of it.
Because fairness is held up as this ultimate moral imperative. We build entire legal systems around it. We build HR departments around it.
We do, but we need to take a very cold, rational look at the ontology of fairness.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, fairness is a social construct. It is a highly complex, agreed-upon fiction that allows large groups of humans to live together without killing each other.
A useful fiction, though.
Incredibly useful, perhaps the most useful construct we have. But it is not a fundamental law of the universe.
Right.
Gravity is a natural law. Thermodynamics is a natural law. Entropy is a natural law. If you step off the ledge of a 10-story building, gravity does not pause halfway down to audit your moral character.
That's a terrifying thought.
It doesn't calculate whether it is fair that you fall based on your past good deeds. You just hit the ground.
Gravity has zero interest in your internal sense of justice.
None. And the broader universe, outside of the specific institutions humans have built, operates exactly the same way.
Yeah.
When you suffer a wound you didn't cause, whether that's a genetic autoimmune disease you inherited, or complex PTSD from a highly abusive childhood, or losing your entire retirement savings because a global pandemic shut down your industry, that wound exists in objective reality.
It's a fact on the ground.
It is a material fact. When you refuse to take responsibility for managing that reality simply because it isn't fair that this happened to me, you are making a catastrophic strategic error.
Because you're just denying the reality.
You are taking all of your personal agency, boxing it up, and handing it over to the very person or circumstance that damaged you in the first place.
Because the underlying logic of that stance is basically my life, my progress, and my healing are officially on pause until you, the perpetrator, or you, the universe, come back and make this right.
You are subordinating your future to an external variable you cannot control. You are waiting for the cosmos to balance a scale that, quite frankly, may never balance.
Yes, sir.
The reality is chilling, but necessary to internalize. The business partner who stole from you might never apologize, and they might never face a judge.
Right.
The parent who neglected you might go to their grave believing they did nothing wrong. The drunk driver who hit you might serve time, but their prison sentence does not magically reconstruct the shattered bones in your leg.
The bones are still broken.
If your active healing process is contingent on the universe providing fairness, you are actively choosing to remain a victim indefinitely.
I need to play devil's advocate here, because if a listener is grappling with a profound betrayal right now, this logic can sound almost offensive.
I completely understand that.
The immediate pushback is, doesn't accepting the responsibility let the person at fault completely off the hook?
That's the fear.
Yeah, like if my business partner embezzles the money and I am the one who works 80-hour weeks for the next 5 years to rebuild the company and pay off the debts, aren't I just enabling their sociopathy? Doesn't taking responsibility just turn me into a doormat who gives bad actors a free pass?
That is the most common and frankly the most understandable objection to this entire philosophy. The resistance stems from confusing the concept of responsibility with the concept of absolution.
Absolution.
Yes. We operate under the false assumption that if we clean up the mess, we are retroactively declaring that the mess was acceptable. We think sweeping the glass means saying, "I'm glad you broke my vase."
Oh, that makes sense.
But that is a profound misunderstanding of the mechanics of ownership.
Break down that distinction for us. How do we separate ownership from absolution?
Taking responsibility for your own healing has absolutely nothing to do with absolving the other party of guilt. It has everything to do with refusing to let your own life remain in a state of ruin. Let's use a more extreme analogy to highlight the absurdity of conflating the two. Imagine you were sitting in your living room and someone maliciously throws a Molotov cocktail through your front window. Your house is now on fire.
An act of unprovoked aggression.
Yeah.
Utterly unfair, highly illegal, and 100% their fault.
Completely their fault. Now, in a functional society, the police will hunt down the arsonist, the district attorney will prosecute them, the judge will sentence them. That entire process is the necessary pursuit of fault, justice, and fairness.
Right. The system does its job.
But right now, in this exact microscopic moment in time, Your couch is engulfed in flames.
The fire is spreading.
The fire is spreading to the curtains. Whose responsibility is it to grab the fire extinguisher from the kitchen? Whose responsibility is it to grab your children and evacuate the structure? It is yours.
Because the police are not there yet.
Even if the police were standing on the lawn, they aren't inside the house. If you stand in the middle of your burning living room, coughing on the smoke, refusing to pull the pin on the fire extinguisher because I didn't start this fire, the arsonist should be the one putting it out. What is the inevitable physical result?
The house burns to the foundation. You lose everything.
Your house turns to ash. Picking up the fire extinguisher does not mean you forgive the arsonist. It does not mean you think throwing Molotov cocktails is a valid form of communication.
Obviously not.
It does not mean you won't testify against them in court. It simply means you value your own life and your own property too much to let it be destroyed while you wait for a philosophical concept like fairness to manifest.
The refusal to take responsibility is essentially a mechanism of punishing yourself twice.
Yes.
You suffer the initial unjust wound of the arson, and then you suffer the total catastrophic loss of the entire house because of your own stubborn ideological demand that the arsonist be the one to hold the hose. It is a compounding of the trauma through inaction.
You weaponize your own sense of justice against your own survival, and the biological toll of this is measurable.
Really? How so?
When you are trapped in that cycle of waiting for fairness, your brain enters a state of chronic rumination. Neurologically, you are continually activating the default mode network, replaying the memory of the trauma, which signals the amygdala to constantly release cortisol and adrenaline.
So you're just bathing your brain in stress hormones.
Constantly. You keep your body in a perpetual state of stress, fighting a ghost from the past, while the actual fire in the present continues to burn.
So if waiting for fairness is this self-destructive, cortisol-drenched trap, what is the mechanical alternative? How do we actively break out of that freeze response, step out of the default mode network, and actually grab the fire extinguisher?
This brings us to the methodology at the core of the source text.
Encapsulated in the phrase, radical accountability.
Yes, the author's choice of terminology here is highly specific. They didn't just advocate for accountability, they attached the modifier radical.
Which usually means, like, extreme or crazy.
In modern vernacular, sure. But the etymology of the word radical comes from the Latin word radix, which means root.
Like a radish.
Exactly. Think of radish. It's a root vegetable. To be radical is to bypass the surface-level symptoms and go to the deepest foundational root of a system.
Oh, that changes the meaning completely.
Radical accountability implies a comprehensive, unconditional ownership of your current reality, down to the bedrock, regardless of the historical chain of events that brought you there.
Which stands in stark contrast to the way most of us operate, which is through a framework of conditional accountability.
Conditional accountability is the bargaining phase of grief disguised as action.
Give me an example of that.
Sounds like this. I will agree to go to couples counseling and work on our marriage if my spouse publicly admits they were the one who ruined our dynamic.
Ah, okay.
Or, I will update my resume and start networking if my former company issues a formal apology for laying me off unfairly. Or, I will start exercising and eating right when my parents finally acknowledge how their toxic behavior caused my eating disorder.
It's treating your own healing as a hostage negotiation.
Exactly.
You're holding your own progress for ransom, demanding concessions from people who often don't even know they're in a negotiation with you.
Precisely. Conditional accountability keeps your actions irrevocably tethered to the unpredictable behavior of others. Radical accountability takes a pair of bolt cutters and severs that tether completely.
It just cuts the cord.
It goes to the root. It states, this is my life. The current state of it, no matter how broken, how unfair, or how damaged by external forces, is mine to manage. The cavalry is not coming. I am the cavalry.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to introduce another scenario to make the visceral reality of this radical shift clear, because this is where the theory hits the bone. Think about a literal physical therapy analogy.
Okay.
Let's say you're crossing a busy intersection. You have the walk signal. You are in the crosswalk. You are doing everything society asks of you perfectly.
Playing by the rules.
A reckless driver, texting on their phone and under the influence, blows through a red light at 60 miles an hour, hits you, and completely shatters your femur and your pelvis.
An indisputable tragedy. A pristine example of a massive wound you did absolutely nothing to cause.
They are entirely at fault. The police arrest the driver. The justice system works flawlessly. They're sentenced to prison. The civil system works flawlessly. Their insurance pays out a multi-million-dollar settlement that covers all your medical bills and lost wages.
Total justice.
Let's even say the emotional closure is there. The driver writes you a deeply sincere, heartbroken letter of apology from their cell, taking full ownership of their terrible choice. You get all the justice, all the restitution, and all the fairness that a society can theoretically provide.
The scales are perfectly balanced. The audit of fault is complete and resolved.
But here is the brutal, unavoidable physical reality of the present moment. No amount of justice, no amount of insurance money in your bank account, and no amount of sincere apologies can do the physical therapy required to make you walk again.
No, they can't.
The driver, sitting in their cell, cannot get on the treadmill for you. The judge who sentenced them cannot do the agonizing leg lifts to rebuild your atrophied muscles. The insurance adjuster cannot endure the sweaty, frustrating, painful hours of retraining your nervous system to balance on 2 feet.
It's entirely on you.
You didn't cause the shattered leg, but you, and only you, possess the biological machinery capable of healing it. Radical accountability is waking up at 6 in the morning, putting on your gym shoes, and stepping onto that physical therapy mat despite the screaming, overwhelming unfairness of the fact that you have to do it at all.
That analogy isolates the exact mechanism of healing. Healing, whether physical, psychological, or financial, is an internal, localized process that requires the exertion of your own energy.
Right.
The perpetrator cannot exert effort on your behalf to heal your tissues or rewire your synapses, but here is the aspect of this process that defies our initial intuition: the psychological shift that occurs when a person actually accepts this heavy, unfair reality.
Because you'd think it would be depressing.
You would logically assume that realizing you have to do all the work to fix a mess you didn't make would be crushing. It sounds like a recipe for deep depression.
It sounds like adding profound insult to grievous injury. Not only did I get hit by the car, but now I have to spend a year in a gym sweating in pain.
It does. And we have to acknowledge that initially, when you transition to radical accountability, there is a period of intense grief. There is rage at the sheer asymmetry of the burden.
Sure, anger is a natural response.
But once you process that initial resistance, once you stop fighting the reality of the broken leg, a profound paradox emerges. The acceptance of radical accountability actually acts as a massive release valve for psychological pressure.
It releases pressure.
Yes, it brings an overwhelming sense of relief.
Relief, walk me through the mechanics of that. How does taking on a massive, unfair burden generate relief?
To understand the release, you have to measure the sheer volume of mental, emotional, and physiological bandwidth it takes to maintain a state of victimhood.
Oh, because waiting takes energy.
It takes an exhausting amount of invisible labor. When you are waiting for fairness, your brain is doing so much work. You are constantly ruminating. You are litigating the past over and over in your head, trying to win arguments that already happened.
Replaying the tape.
Endlessly monitoring the horizon to see if the universe is finally going to balance the scales. You are operating from a state of learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness.
It's a concept pioneered by psychologist Martin Seligman, where you believe your actions have no effect on your outcomes. This state consumes an immense amount of cognitive energy, but yields absolutely zero forward momentum.
It's like flooring the accelerator of a car while the transmission is
stuck in neutral.
Exactly. The engine is screaming, the fuel is burning rapidly, you are generating a massive amount of heat and noise, but the car hasn't moved an inch. You are just wearing out the machine.
That is a perfect mechanical metaphor. The moment you embrace radical accountability, you take your foot off that specific gas pedal. You stop litigating the past because you realize the verdict won't change the present.
You just accept it.
You accept that the vase is broken, the house is on fire, the leg is shattered. And suddenly, all of that hijacked cognitive bandwidth, all of that misdirected emotional energy is freed up.
That makes a lot of sense.
It can now be channeled entirely into the task-positive network of the brain. It can be channeled into building the future, into the physical therapy, into designing the new business model. The relief you feel isn't because the work is easy.
Right. The physical therapy still hurts.
It still hurts. The relief comes from the sudden, undeniable rush of agency. It is this shift from learned helplessness to self-efficacy. You are no longer waiting on the porch in the dark. You are inside, taking action.
You stop waiting for the ghost of the past to come back and build your future. That is incredibly empowering when we're talking about individual trauma. But the source text doesn't let us stay in that clean, isolated laboratory of the individual.
No, it doesn't.
It introduces a massive complication in the second half of the title, because we don't live on desert islands. We live in complex networks. We exist in marriages, we co-found companies, we operate in corporate hierarchies, we live in communities.
Very frequent.
And the title of the text is Radical Accountability and the Burden of Shared Responsibility.
This is where the elegant theory has to survive the messy, friction-filled reality of human systems. We need to analyze the juxtaposition the author has set up here.
Okay, let's dig into that.
The first half, radical accountability, implies a total, localized, absolute ownership. It is an island of personal sovereignty. But then it immediately crashes into the concept of a shared system where variables are out of your control.
It almost sounds like a structural contradiction. If accountability is supposed to be radical and total for the individual, how on earth does that interface with a system like a marriage or a business partnership where responsibilities are, by definition, supposed to be distributed?
Look at the specific noun the author chose to bridge those two competing ideas. They didn't write about the joy of shared responsibility.
No.
They didn't call it the logistics of shared responsibility or the synergy of it. They specifically called it the burden.
The burden, that is a heavy, almost oppressive word. It implies exhaustion. It implies carrying something that weighs you down.
It is an honest acknowledgement that applying radical accountability in a shared system is profoundly heavy.
Yeah.
Because when you introduce unilateral ownership into an environment where responsibilities are supposed to be shared, the practical reality is that you are often going to end up carrying significantly more than your mathematically fair share of the load.
I have to throw a massive red flag here because I can hear the listener practically screaming at their device.
Tell me.
If I am in a partnership, let's say I am a co-founder in a startup, or I am 10 years into a marriage, and the unspoken contract is that the responsibility is shared 50-50.
Right.
If my partner starts dropping the ball, and I implement this philosophy of radical accountability, and I just start fixing every single problem, regardless of whose fault it is, doesn't that just lead directly to catastrophic burnout?
That is the danger, yes.
Aren't we just volunteering to become the ultimate martyr by constantly picking up the slack? Aren't we actively training the other person that their incompetence or laziness will always be subsidized by our effort?
That is the crux of the dilemma in shared systems.
Yeah.
It is the danger of misapplying the concept. And it requires us to draw a razor-sharp line between radical accountability and enabling dysfunction.
Where is that line?
Because your critique is entirely accurate. If you define radical accountability as simply doing your partner's job for them in silence while swallowing your resentment to keep the peace, you will absolutely burn out. You will become a martyr.
And you'll resent them.
And ironically, you will ultimately destroy the relationship or the organization anyway, because resentment is highly corrosive.
Right. Like, fine, you forgot to file the quarterly taxes again. I'll just stay up until 3 a.m. and do them. Or, fine, you ignored the kid's schedule again. I'll just cancel my meetings and handle it.
Exactly.
That doesn't feel like I am reclaiming my power. It feels like I am just becoming a highly efficient servant to their dysfunction.
Because that behavior is not radical accountability. That is a psychological dynamic often referred to in therapy as the Cartman drama triangle.
The drama triangle.
Yes. You are vacillating between playing the rescuer who fixes everything and the victim who is oppressed by the burden, while viewing your partner as the persecutor. It is passive aggression disguised as nobility.
Wow. Okay. That stings a bit.
It does. Radical accountability in a shared system is not about silently doing the physical labor of others. It is about taking total ownership of your response to the reality of the shared dynamic.
That is a very subtle but crucial distinction. Taking ownership of the response, not necessarily doing the task. Expand on what that actually looks like in practice.
Let's go back to your startup co-founder example. If your co-founder is consistently failing to meet their obligations, maybe they aren't closing sales or they are mismanaging the engineering. Taking radical accountability does not mean you do your job during the day and then secretly do their job at night while seething with anger.
Which is what a lot of people do.
Radical accountability means you own the communication of the failure. You own the boundary setting. It means stepping back and saying, I am entirely responsible for the ultimate success of this venture. My chosen partner is currently failing to meet the necessary standard. Therefore, what am I going to do about the architecture of this partnership?
You take ownership of navigating the ship, not necessarily running down to the boiler room to shovel their share of the coal.
Precisely. You own the meta-level reality. Taking action might mean you initiate a radically honest, highly uncomfortable confrontation. It might mean you restructure the equity of the partnership to reflect the actual distribution of labor. It might mean you say, I am no longer willing to operate in a system with this level of dysfunction. And you take the incredibly difficult but empowering step of dissolving the company or leaving the marriage. Or conversely, you might look at the situation, realize your partner has limitations, and consciously, voluntarily choose to stay and carry 60 or 70% of the load.
Yeah.
Because the overall value of the entity is still worth the asymmetric effort to you.
But the fundamental shift is that you own the choice.
Exactly. You own the choice. You are no longer a hostage to your lazy co-founder or an unfair system. You are an active agent deciding how to strategically manage a flawed environment.
So the internal monologue shifts completely. You stop saying, my co-founder is ruining my life and making me miserable because they won't do their job. Instead, you say, I am actively choosing to remain in a partnership with an underperforming co-founder. Why am I making that choice? What are the boundaries I need to set? And what are my next steps to manage the risk I have accepted?
Exactly. The burden of shared responsibility is the heavy, sobering realization that you cannot control the other person's level of accountability. You cannot force them to care.
You can only control yourself.
You can only control your own standard. And sometimes the most radically responsible thing you can do for a shared system is to clearly articulate its failure and force a structural change, rather than silently enabling the rot to continue.
Even if it's painful.
It is an immense burden to be the one who calls out the dysfunction. It risks conflict, it risks the end of the relationship, but it is the necessary price of admission for something far more valuable.
Which is total personal freedom.
Yes, the freedom from being perpetually reliant on other people acting perfectly in order for you to be okay.
This brings the entire architecture of the text into incredibly sharp focus. As we start synthesizing these themes, I want to tie the title of our source, Text Taking Responsibility for Things That Aren't Your Fault, directly back to the core premise we established at the very beginning of this session.
The power of ownership.
The profound, unyielding power of ownership. The reality that you didn't cause the wound, but you are the only one who can heal it.
When you zoom out and look at the psychological trajectory we've mapped today, it is clear that internalizing this paradigm shift is not an overnight event.
No, not at all.
It is a grueling journey. When a person first hears this concept, the assertion that they're solely responsible for doing the heavy lifting to heal a trauma they didn't ask for, it is terrifying. It triggers every evolutionary defense mechanism we have. It feels like a fundamental violation of the social contract.
It feels like an accusation. It feels like someone is looking at your bleeding knee and saying, well, what are you going to do about it? Instead of offering you a bandage.
It absolutely does. But once it is truly accepted, once a person metabolizes the harsh truth of it and moves past the grief of the unfairness, it becomes the single most empowering truth a human being can possess.
Because it gives you control back.
Because think about the inverse. If you cling to the belief that the person who caused your wound is the only one who has the authority or the capability to heal it, look at the position you put yourself in.
A completely helpless one.
Your healing, your professional success, your future relationships, and your fundamental peace of mind are now entirely dependent on the competence, the remorse, or the unpredictable goodwill of the exact people who wronged you in the first place.
You are quite literally putting the keys to your own emotional jail cell into the pocket of the person who locked you inside and hoping they eventually wander back to let you out.
You are permanently tethered to the source of your trauma. Radical accountability is the realization that you have always had a spare key in your own pocket. You don't have to wait for the warden to experience a crisis of conscience. You can unlock the door yourself.
So what does this all mean? Which brings us to the practical application. What does this actually look like for you, the person listening right now, as you close this session and go back to your life?
The day-to-day.
Yeah, the daily practice. It means recognizing that embracing radical accountability is not a one-time philosophical epiphany that you achieve and then never think about again. It is a rigorous, daily, sometimes hourly cognitive practice.
It takes constant vigilance.
It's about becoming hyper-aware of your own internal narrative. It's about catching yourself in those micro moments of frustration. Catching yourself when your instinct is to complain, my boss should have communicated that deadline better. The market shouldn't be so volatile right now. My partner should have anticipated that I was stressed.
Pay close attention to the vocabulary there. The word should is the ultimate red flag in cognitive behavioral therapy.
The word should.
Should is the language of entitlement. It is the language of waiting for fairness. When you say the world should be a certain way, you are arguing with reality, and reality wins 100% of the time.
Yes. Catching that should, stopping the thought process, and actively replacing it with a question of ownership. Okay, my boss didn't communicate the deadline clearly. That is the reality. So how am I going to handle the fallout? What is my strategy to ensure I get the information I need next time?
Exactly.
It is a subtle semantic shift, but it creates a massive shift in neurochemistry. It moves you out of the amygdala's threat response and into the prefrontal cortex's problem-solving mode. It takes the burden mentioned in our source text and transforms it from a crushing, paralyzing weight into a structural pillar for unimaginable resilience.
Because true resilience is not about avoiding damage. It isn't about building a life so safe that you never get hit by a reckless driver or betrayed by a partner.
Right, that's impossible.
Resilience is measured by how quickly and efficiently you can take ownership of the repair process after the inevitable damage occurs. The individuals who navigate complex lives with the most grace and the most sustained power are not the ones who miraculously avoid getting wounded.
They just don't waste time.
They are the individuals who waste the absolute minimum amount of time demanding that the universe explain why they got wounded. They observe the wound, accept the unfairness of it, and immediately get to work on the healing.
It is the fundamental difference between operating as a passive observer of your life circumstances and an active architect of your reality. Even when the materials you are handed to build with are warped, damaged, or entirely unfair, you are still the architect.
And that profound shift in identity, from being a victim of external circumstance to being the architect of your own recovery, is the absolute essence of what this text is trying to impart.
It's self-respect.
It is ultimately the highest form of self-respect. You respect yourself, your time, and your potential too much to leave your well-being in the hands of mathematical chance, or worse, in the hands of people who have already proven they are careless with it.
Let's pull all of these threads together and map out the ground we've covered today. We started by unpacking a simple but profound semantic divide that dictates how we perceive time and agency.
Fault versus responsibility.
Exactly. Fault looks backward, acting as a historian to assign blame, while responsibility looks forward, acting as a builder to figure out what to do next. We discovered that our evolutionary programming forces us to conflate the two, which keeps us trapped.
We then dismantled the illusion of fairness. We recognized that while justice is a necessary goal for society at large, waiting for the scales of fairness to balance in the microscopic reality of our personal lives is a devastating victim trap.
It paralyzes us in the middle of our own burning house, waiting for an arsonist to bring a hose.
From there, we dissected the concept of radical accountability. We explored the physical therapy analogy to demonstrate that even when an external force is 100% at fault for breaking your leg, you are the only entity capable of putting in the physical sweat to heal it.
And we learned that confronting this unfairness initially brings grief, but ultimately releases the massive cognitive burden of learned helplessness.
And finally, we navigated the treacherous waters of the burden of shared responsibility. We clarified that taking ownership in a shared system does not mean becoming a silent, resentful martyr who does everyone else's work.
It means taking total, uncompromising ownership of your boundaries.
Your boundaries, your communication, and your active choices within any flawed system.
It is a heavy philosophy. It demands a lot of you, but it is incredibly liberating. As we close this deep dive, I want to push this concept just one step further.
Let's hear it.
We've spent this entire session focused on how radical accountability gives us the power to heal the wounds that others have unfairly inflicted upon us. But if we truly adopt this framework, if we truly separate the historical audit of fault from the present tense requirement of responsibility, it forces a massive paradigm shift in how we view the wounds that we inevitably cause others.
It turns the mirror completely around. If we accept that the victim of a wound is ultimately the only one who can do the internal work to heal it, it forces us to realize the profound limitations of our own apologies.
Wow.
When we are at fault, when we are the ones who carelessly break the vase or betray the trust, our apologies and our restitution, while necessary, are insufficient. We cannot get on the treadmill for them.
We can't do the physical therapy for them.
It strips away the ego-driven belief that we can simply say, I'm sorry, and magically fix the damage we've done to someone else's internal landscape. It demands a much deeper humility about the lasting impact of our actions.
That is something to sit with. The power to heal is localized, which means the damage we cause is often beyond our ability to fully repair. And here's the final question I want to leave you with. If you were to completely drop the demand that the universe balanced the scales of fairness today, what is the very first thing in your life that you suddenly have the power to fix? Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Take that power of ownership, drop the demand for fairness, and step onto the treadmill of your own life this week.
Thanks for spending this time with us on Coffee Break. If this conversation stayed with you, you can find more episodes here on the channel. Until next time, take care.